The Swarm Host is a tier 2.5 ground unit for Zerg. Once you have the lair, you make the infestation pit, and then you can make Swarm Hosts. Now, a Swarm Host is the ultimate siege unit in the entire game. You burrow it underground, and it releases locusts 2 at a time. These locusts are free units that are pretty powerful overall and can walk around and attack wherever they like. Because they have a pretty long lifespan, they can walk very, very far, which makes this a great siege unit indeed. When you use the Swarm Host at all, you're really going to want to get Enduring Locusts. It's an upgrade on the Infestation Pit that makes those locusts stay alive a lot longer. Swarm Hosts are not very useful against Terran. While they can be used if your opponent tries to go for a more mechanical approach to the game, normally people will go for a more marine medevac heavy approach, and in this you'll never want more than 1 or 2 Swarm Hosts. The 1 or 2 Swarm Hosts can shoot out their free locusts and set off Widow Mines before your army goes in, but that's about the extent of their usefulness. Swarm Hosts will sometimes be seen in the supreme late game of Zerg vs Zerg. You can't really use them in the earlier game because Zerg will be able to overrun you, but as you get into the very late game, if you and your opponent are both using Roach Hydra, Swarm Hosts can be very useful. The Locusts can go in front of your army, tank a lot of damage, and deal a lot of damage as well, so that you don't lose any units that are actually worth money. Swarm Hosts are primarily used against Protoss, and normally just in the late game. While there are some early game all-ins off of 2 and 3 bases, they aren't really all that popular. When you get to the late game though, especially if the map is half map versus half map, the Swarm Hosts become very powerful. Once you get over 20 against Protoss, and they're sitting behind a lot of spores, spines, and have some backup units such as Vipers and Infestors, it becomes very hard for Protoss to break through. The endless waves of the free locusts whittle Protoss down very quickly, and they do an especially good job at pushing back High Templars. Now, when you can push back High Templars, suddenly your other support units come into play. The Infestors, the Vipers, become very powerful without High Templars at the front of the Protoss army to stop them. Now, for upgrades, I already mentioned that Enduring Locusts is very important. Always get that when you're going to go for a substantial amount of Swarm Hosts. Also, the ranged attack as well as the carapace are very important. The Locusts get these upgrades, and if you get a lot of those upgrades, the Locusts become more and more effective. So remember, when you want to use the Swarm Host, make sure it's against Zerg in the very late game or Protoss in the very late game. Also remember, get your upgrades and keep it behind a lot of defense. The Viper is a tier 3 flying spellcaster unit for Zerg. Once you have the Hive, you can make the Viper. You don't need any other tech structures. The Viper has 3 abilities, all of which are very important. The first ability is Consume. With Consume, the Viper will leech hit points off of friendly Zerg structures. For instance, you can tell your Viper to consume your hatchery, your extractor, or maybe some extra evolution chambers as pro gamers oftentimes do. These buildings will lose health, but the Viper will very quickly gain energy. This allows you to get more use out of your Vipers. You don't have to wait for them to gain energy on their own like you do with Infestors. Another ability is Blinding Cloud. Blinding Cloud is a green fog that's thrown down on the ground. All units under that green cloud now have a range of 1. This is very good against ranged units. If you put it down, then suddenly the units have to walk through the cloud towards your Zerg army to attack, or they have to retreat. It can be especially good when your opponent's army is pinned up against a wall to prevent many of them from shooting at you. The last and perhaps most important ability on the Viper is Abduct. Abduct will grab a unit that's up to 9 range away from you and bring it to the Viper. This is an extremely powerful ability for sniping off and killing the most important units in your opponent's army. The expensive units such as battlecruisers, colossi, and void rays can be abducted over so that you can kill them very easily. The Viper is most useful against Terran when they go for mech. Against Bio, you won't see it too often, but against mech they have lots of very long-range units that Blinding Cloud is very useful against, as well as expensive units that you can abduct into your army so that you can kill them very easily. The Viper is the least useful in Zerg vs. Zerg. There's simply not much to be done with it, so we never really see them used there. The Viper is most useful against Protoss. Abduct and Blinding Cloud are two very powerful weapons against the Protoss Death Ball. You'll use Abduct against units such as Colossi, Void Rays, and Tempest to pull them away from the protection of the Protoss army and into your Zerg army so that you can kill them more easily. Blinding Cloud is also very useful, especially since a late-game Protoss army contains mostly ranged units, such as Immortals, Stalkers, and Colossi. The Blinding Cloud deals very well with all of these. Against Protoss, you'll oftentimes see what they're doing and decide, oh, I need Vipers against this. So when you're playing against Protoss, make sure that you get up to Vipers reasonably fast. The Viper already starts with all of its abilities, so you won't need to get any upgrades for that. As far as Flyer Carapace, which you could technically upgrade for the Viper, it's really not needed. The Viper is very fragile, and if it gets targeted, it's going to die whether it has those upgrades or not. So remember, don't use the Viper against Zerg. If you're going to use it against Terran, then use it against factory and starport units. Against Protoss, Blinding Cloud will be useful, but mostly you're going to be using Abduct against units like the Colossi, Void Ray, and Tempest.